I do research. So I study companies and I study basically new technology strategies that companies in developing contexts used to build dignified buildings. Right now, I'm working on helping Micdee kind of expand their reach to clients that are not just businesses. So really trying to understand kind of digging deep into the question of what does good work from home furniture feel like for a professional living and working in Nigeria. And so that's really what the project is like, trying to define not just the parameters of use, like sitting, doing work, and usability, like comfort, but also the parameters of like, you know, like what's the vibe? Like what is what is the soul of work from home furniture? Like what does it mean to people? What does it need to mean to people is another good question. So pretty big questions, honestly. We had some deep conversations, but just really trying to unearth what does furniture need to do for people physically, but also psychologically. So I think in general, this is my hot take actually, I think many Africans in general, things are not designed for us, they're dumped on us. Like products, I'm sure you've all bought products that the plugs don't fit into the wall. And for us it's normal, but when you go to other countries, you realize your products are plugging in directly, right? So lots of things are dumped on us. So first of all, I'm just pro, like we need to design for real people. There's some dignity that comes when someone thinks I'm important enough to learn about me and make something that works for me. Point A. Now point B, why it's important to design work from home furniture is really that since COVID, everywhere in the world, the nature of work has changed. We're not all going into the office every day, and we're not all just working from home every day either. And also in a place like Lagos, everybody has by and large more than one job. And so the nature of the home space is not just about like sleeping, cooking, eating. There's also such a huge component. And the more we can create spaces that not just dignify people's living existence, but also their working existences, making them more comfortable, less prone to injury, but also helping with that psychological wrestle of where I am versus where I want to be. It gives people a sense of dignity, not just in their health, but also in their minds. And dignity is an important thing. I think that is definitely my MO as a researcher. You know, that in and of itself is a lot of work. And that actually, so lots of people do research in very different ways, and there's theoretical research, which is, I will phrase it more as like, here's the formula for this, or here's this new drug not even a drug, here's this new theoretical proof I've made, or this new mixed design I've made. But then there's, I guess what some people will call action research, which is kind of more of what I do, which is like not necessarily going deep into manufacturing just new knowledge, but thinking about how new knowledge applies in the world. Because there are two sides to the same coin, and many of the best researchers learn to do both, but it does take time. So I think that when you think about research, a lot of the time you think about, I do some interviews, I do a survey and I publish it. But what I'm saying is that's one way to do research and very valid. And my heart is more taken to research that says, okay, here's this survey data that says that ventilation is better than air conditioning, for example. Let's do more research to understand, well, if that's the case, why don't people use it? And what are some interventions that can be done to make it more popular? So, and I say this because implementing research is not necessarily rocket science. It's not as hard as like creating necessarily like a new proof in that sense. It's not as like theoretically difficult sometimes. But it does take a different type of labor, and it's flexing an entirely different type of muscle. And I think that's where it can be very difficult for a very theoretical person, because you're flexing the muscle of people, of learning about systems. You're flexing the muscle of how to interact and lobby for change, while also giving people the patience to absorb change and for the change to come from within them and not from you. So I think there are two sides to the same coin, but they're not. You don't learn those two skills by doing the exact same thing sometimes. My PhD research, to describe it at a high level, really thinks about how businesses and organizations are implementing certain construction technologies in developing cities. So think Lagos, Nairobi, so cities like that, kind of these large cities, how they're implementing these new construction technologies in a way that is true to kind of their local culture and the local construction practice. So my research explores like technology strategy, but also business strategy. What are things that businesses are doing to make any technology really feel local and feel like it's come from within people? Even before we get to strategy, right, there's also mission. And I'm definitely driven by the idea that everyone should have access to spaces that are safe and dignified, whether that's your home space where you sleep, where you cook, or your workspace, or in the world we live in today, your work from home space. And that's why I think it's important. It's not as Micdee has a lot of great architects, and you'll find here that it's not just about making this beautiful render or designing this thing that looks shiny on a laptop, but it's also about like, how do we learn about people? It's like, we've talked about the technical end, but then you're also flexing a different muscle of how are we delivering real value to real people, not just to the clients, but also to the ecosystem of builders, right? Because builders are often forgotten. You're an artisan, you're someone who's actually, you work in, like you can be an artisan like a mason, you could be a carpenter. Those people are often forgotten. But when we design buildings, we're not just designing a system for an end user, we're designing a construction process that a real human being has to follow. They're gonna have back pain if they lift this thing too high or too low. And so in order to really summarize all of that, like the work we do at Micdee is important because we're thinking about not just the future of work for different businesses, but also for the people working. How does the environment they're working in, like the physical workspace, the work from home space, support their own ability to work? At Micdee, I was very fortunate to kind of flex this other muscle I was talking about of not just theoretical research, but also like how to take kind of grounded knowledge and insights and kind of produce something out of it, right? And so day to day, you would have seen me doing interviews, either online or in person, doing a lot of kind of qualitative coding, in a lot of meetings, presenting and brainstorming, and then thinking about strategy. So I was just going between like, what do potential users of Micdee's products and future products want to see? And then how can we as a company make sure we provide that? But then also, how can we as a company also set the groundwork for Micdee employees to be able to continue to innovate? So creating a cycle of innovation. That's what I'll say I did. I'm going to describe this in an analogy. So many people grow up in a certain neighborhood or community. Maybe you go to school in a different community or church or university. You move around between communities. When you are exposed to a group you don't know anything about, there's a certain way you kind of test the waters, right? You ask questions like, we don't dress like this here. Why is that? Or you watch how people interact with each other. I think it's a very similar kind of interpersonal skill, right? Asking the right question. There's no way you're going to ask the right question the first time. The same way there's no way you're going to get another culture the first time. But there's a process of learning which question is the right question. The same way there's a process of learning a different culture, what's taboo, what's good, what's bad. And so I would say it took us like a good 2 weeks of talking to people before I started landing on, people are never going to answer this question directly, before I started landing on, this is the verbiage people like to use, before I even started landing on like, how do you move your body in a way that doesn't make people feel confused, intimidated, othered. So it's a lot of watching. It's like when you make a new friend, you watch them, they sit like this, you don't want to like, you know what I mean? You watch, you mirror a little bit. The right question, as well as the answers to those questions, emerge from the people you're talking to. So I feel like as long as you do everything you can to make another person comfortable, people want to be heard. So it's your job as a researcher to show and to align yourself with them and show that you are here to listen and you're determined to listen and to make it such that they are heard. It's like a friendship, you know? I mean, obviously not all the people I spoke to are my actual like friends that I'd known for a while. But you treat it like friendship. You treat other people with respect. And as I said, people are competent. Treat them like a child, you get a child. But if you treat them like a knowledgeable person who has authority in what you're speaking about and who you want to listen to, then they will speak. I think empathy is important, and empathy in different people is going to look different, right? We all empathize differently. But I think at the core of empathy is the constant reminder to yourself that this person makes sense, and it's my job to figure out how and why. we've all had experiences where someone has told us something that like we're just like, I cannot, why would you think that, why would you say that? But what empathy does and how it leads you to the right questions and then the right answers is that everyone tells themselves stories in their head. When I took a need finding class on campus, they talked about everybody tells themselves stories, right? We can have the same experience, and if there's any area of ambiguity, we'll all fill it in very differently. And what empathy does is that it tells you everybody makes sense. Yes, we've experienced the same thing, but based on our past, we've believed different stories about things that are ambiguous. And as a researcher, as I dare I even say, as a designer, it's your job to figure out how does this person make sense? Because everybody makes sense. Nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to do something really dumb. Or like, today I'm going to do the dumbest thing possible. Nobody does that. Everybody makes decisions that are sensible with the information that they have. That's what empathy leads you to. And I think that there can be this perception that like people, especially like people in Lagos with the current economic situation, there's this perception that everything aesthetic falls to the side and nobody cares about that. And while I didn't like truly believe it, part of me was worried that like could be among the findings. But it was surprising to see like how much, not just how much people cared, but how many different ways people had created to work around like what they have versus what they wanted. Because it was like not just a situation of, oh, I have money or I don't have money, therefore I have what I want, so I don't have what I want. There was a real wrestle with, I have this and I don't have this, but how do I like use these tools to get me closer and closer to what I want? Someone once said that like, oh, like when you go to Africans, like they just want a house, but with Americans, they want a nice house. Like, do you see that binary? And it's like, when you do the work, truly, you realize that's not true. Everybody wants a nice house. Nice means different things to different people. And based on what people can afford, they wrestle with the idea of nice. And it's that internal wrestle, that like back and forth, that like, you know, the little like throw a punch and throw a punch, like it's a daily fight. And it's a very significant daily fight, but people are doing it. And people are doing everything they can to win the fight. So yeah, it's not binary. Nothing is binary in life. There's this, what I've observed when people like, especially want to come to any part of the African continent, obviously you're going to come with your preconceived notions. And at some point you just have to accept that you're going to have opinions that may or may not be true. And I think what's really important moving around the world is being open to asking questions instead of filling in the blanks yourself. I see a lot of research coming out of the continent that's extremely obvious. Like, for example, like you'll see research, like if somebody else had done this research about what is good work from home furniture, some people would have said, yes, good work from home furniture prevents you from having back pain and keeps you productive. And that's extremely obvious. But it's really the non-obvious insights that we're looking for. What is it that you don't know is going on, but also a lot of the time the people you're speaking with don't also know is going on, right? I feel like you're looking for things that people will say like, oh, I've never heard that before. You know what I mean? And so I feel that if I was to talk to another researcher trying to do meaningful work in a place where they're not very familiar, is that like, if it's very obvious, if it's like a well duh, then you've barely scratched the surface. And I need to cite my sources before they say I plagiarize it, but basically this is a principle I learned from a need finding class by Michael Berry.